I woke up to the steady hum of rain against my bedroom window. It was soft, barely more than a whisper, yet it made the whole room feel oddly heavy, like a warning I couldn't quite put my finger on. My head ached, probably from the late night of restless tossing and turning. Today was supposed to be a good day. A great one, actually. But all I could feel was the weight of everything I'd done. I pushed off the sheets and got out of bed, trying to shake off the strange nagging feeling. I glanced at the marriage license resting on my bedside table. The one I got with Brandon yesterday. My fiancé. Well, no, that wasn't right anymore. Technically, I was married now. I was someone's wife. The thought still felt like a stranger's, awkward in my mouth, too big and clumsy. Brandon and I had known each other forever. He was safe, dependable, the kind of guy who made my parents smile and who knew exactly what to say to make me feel stable. But stability wasn't excitement, and he never made my heart race. I loved him in the way you love a comfortable sweater. Warm, familiar, but never setting your skin on fire. We were good together, but he didn't make me breathless. That was why yesterday felt more like I was closing a door than opening one. I went downstairs, feeling the quiet of the empty house wrap around me like a blanket. Brandon was already at work, and he wouldn't be back until later. That was how things always were with him. Predictable. It was comforting, or at least it used to be. I made myself a cup of coffee, leaning against the counter and staring out the window, wondering if my doubts would ever fade. The silence was shattered by the distant roar of an engine. I froze, my heart beating faster for reasons I didn't want to acknowledge. I knew that sound. The low rumble, almost a purr, turning to a deep growl as it got closer. Before I could stop myself, I was running to the front door, opening it just as a sleek red racing car skidded to a halt in my driveway. She stepped out like she owned the world. Fiona. My fiancée. Well, former fiancé. She looked as wild and reckless as ever, her dark hair tousled and lips curved in that familiar cocky smile that always made my stomach flip. She was wearing a leather jacket, even in the rain, like nothing in the world could touch her. And it never did. Until I broke her heart 2 months ago. "Hey there, Mrs. Wife," she called, her voice taunting, yet threaded with something sharp raw that made my breath hitch. Or is it still Miss, since I wasn't invited to the wedding? I felt my face heat, anger and guilt mixing into something I couldn't quite hide. "Fiona, what are you doing here?" I tried to keep my voice steady, but she could always hear the cracks. "I heard the news." She stepped closer, her eyes burning with an intensity that made me feel like I was being pulled apart. "So I thought I'd come congratulate the happy bride." Her words were light, playful, but the tightness around her mouth told another story. There was pain there, and I knew I was the cause. She hadn't taken off her helmet yet, just lifted the visor enough for me to see the anger and challenge flashing in her eyes. I wanted to say something, anything to wipe away that look, but I couldn't. Because I didn't have a good excuse for the mess I'd made of both our hearts. Instead, I stepped aside, gesturing for her to come in. She hesitated for just a moment before walking past me, the faint scent of gasoline and something sweet trailing after her. We stood in the kitchen, awkward and stiff, like two strangers pretending they didn't once know every inch of each other's skin. She eyed the marriage license on the counter, her mouth twisting. "So it's real then?" "Yeah," I said quietly, my fingers curling around the edge of the table. "It's real. Congratulations." The word came out harsh, bitter, and it twisted in my chest like a knife. "Fiona, please. Don't." She cut me off, stepping closer until I could see every freckle on her face, every glint of hurt in her stormy eyes. "Don't say you're sorry. I don't want your pity." "It's not pity," I whispered, my voice barely holding together. But whatever I was about to say died in my throat as she reached up, slowly pulling off her helmet and letting it fall to the floor. Her hair tumbled out, wild and free, and for a moment I forgot how to breathe. She was beautiful in a way that was almost painful, the kind of beauty that was too sharp to hold. "I came here because I had to see for myself," she said, her voice lower, softer now. "Because I had to look in your eyes and know if you really meant it. If you really chose him." I felt my eyes burn, the tears threatening to spill, and I hated myself for being so weak. I had made my choice. I had picked the safe, stable life with Brandon. I had walked away from the fire, because fire burns. But now, standing so close to Fiona, I wondered if I had made the worst mistake of my life. She stepped closer, and I couldn't move. My back hit the kitchen counter, and she was so close I could feel the heat radiating off her skin. "Tell me you don't still want me," she said, her breath warm against my face. "Look me in the eyes and tell me you don't miss us." I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come. She reached out, her fingers brushing my cheek, and my resolve shattered. I grabbed her wrist, not to push her away, but to pull her closer. And then her lips were on mine, fierce and desperate, and all the guilt and pain melted into a dizzying, overwhelming need. I kissed her back like I'd been starving for her, like I was drowning and she was the only air I had left. It was messy, frantic, and I didn't care about anything but the way she tasted, the way her hands tangled in my hair and pulled me closer until there was nothing left between us. But then reality crashed over me, and I tore myself away, gasping for breath. "Stop," I choked out, my chest heaving. This isn't right. I'm married now. Married." She laughed, a bitter broken sound, and wiped a tear from my cheek with the back of her hand. "To a man who doesn't even make your pulse quicken? Look me in the eyes and tell me that kiss didn't mean anything." I couldn't. Because it did. It meant everything. Fiona's eyes were like storm clouds, swirling with rage and sorrow, and for a moment, I thought she was going to leave. Instead, she grabbed my hand, her fingers warm and firm around mine. "I'm not giving up on you," she said fiercely, her voice raw and shaking. "Not until you look me in the eyes and tell me I'm wrong." She kissed my knuckles, slow and lingering, and it felt like a promise, a plea, and a goodbye all at once. Then she was gone, her red car roaring down the driveway, leaving me standing there with my heart in pieces, not knowing if I'd just made the best decision of my life or the worst mistake I would ever make. I sank to the floor, my hands still tingling where her lips had touched, and let the tears fall. It wasn't fair. It wasn't supposed to be like this. But the truth, the undeniable painful truth, was that even now as a married woman, my heart still beat to the rhythm of her engine. The days blurred together after Fiona left. It was easier to pretend I hadn't kissed her back, easier to play the part of the dutiful wife when Brandon came home from work with his tired smiles and gentle touches. I threw myself into routines, cooking dinner, cleaning the house, smiling at all the right moments, but my mind kept drifting back to her. Every time I heard the rumble of a car engine outside, my heart would jump, my breath catching in my throat, only to sink with disappointment when it wasn't her. I knew it was wrong. I knew I shouldn't think about Fiona, shouldn't want her the way I did, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, wild, angry, beautiful, like she was burned into my mind. One evening, as Brandon droned on about work, I found myself staring at my wedding ring, twisting it around my finger. It felt heavy, like a chain that was slowly tightening around my chest. I looked up at Brandon, who was focused on his laptop, completely absorbed in his spreadsheets, and guilt twisted inside me. He deserved better than this. He deserved a wife who wasn't haunted by someone else's touch. "Brandon," I said softly, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't hear me. I cleared my throat and tried again, louder this time. "Brandon." He glanced up, distracted, his eyes distant and tired. "I'm going out for a drive," I said, forcing a smile. "I need some air." He barely looked up from the screen, just nodded. "Okay. Don't stay out too late." "Right." I grabbed my keys, my pulse already quickening, and left before he could ask any more questions. The night air was crisp, cool against my skin as I walked to my car. I didn't have a destination in mind. I just needed to get away, to clear my head. But before I knew it, I was driving toward the edge of town, where the roads grew quieter and the street lights fewer. The stars were brighter out here, and the darkness felt like a blanket, wrapping around me and muffling the rest of the world. And then I heard it. That familiar growl of an engine, smooth and powerful, growing louder behind me. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, my heart leaping into my throat. I pulled over, my breath hitching as I watched the headlights of Fiona's red car approach in the rearview mirror. She pulled up beside me, the window already rolled down. I could see her smirking, her eyes catching the moonlight like they were lit from within. "Fancy meeting you here," she called, and my stomach did a slow flip. I hesitated, feeling the pull of her presence like a magnet, and then got out of the car. She did the same, slamming her door shut as she leaned against the hood, arms crossed over her chest. "Couldn't stay away, could you?" she teased, but there was a softness in her voice, a vulnerability that she tried to hide behind a grin. "Neither could you," I shot back, my voice steady even though my hands were trembling. She shrugged, her smile fading into something more serious, more real. "I was waiting for you. I knew you'd come." The words hung between us, heavy and undeniable. She pushed off the hood and closed the distance between us in a few long strides. This time, when she stopped in front of me, she didn't touch me. Instead, she just looked into my eyes, and it felt like she could see everything I was trying so hard to hide. "Tell me you don't want this," she said, her voice barely a whisper, and I couldn't. My silence was the only answer she needed. She reached for my hand, her fingers threading through mine, and I let her. The night was still, the world quiet around us except for the sound of our breathing, our hearts beating too fast. She pulled me closer, her forehead resting against mine, and I felt the warmth of her breath against my lips. "You don't have to be afraid," she murmured, and I believed her. Then she kissed me. This time, it wasn't desperate or frantic. It was slow, lingering, like she was memorizing every inch of my mouth. Her lips were soft, gentle, and it made me ache in a way that was both beautiful and terrifying. I kissed her back, my arms sliding around her waist, pulling her closer until I could feel the steady beat of her heart against mine. It would have been so easy to lose myself in her, to forget everything but the way she made me feel. Alive, burning, electric. But I pulled away, breathless and scared. "What are we doing?" I asked, my voice shaking, and she just smiled, brushing a strand of hair away from my face. "Living," she said simply. "Loving." I wanted to believe it was that easy, but I knew it wasn't. There was still a ring on my finger, still a husband waiting for me back home, even if he felt more like a stranger every day. I stepped back, putting distance between us, and Fiona's face fell. "You don't have to decide now," she said softly, her eyes never leaving mine. "But don't lie to yourself, okay? Don't pretend you don't love me." I looked away, unable to hold her gaze. "I'm married," I said, my voice hollow, and it felt like the words were choking me. "Yeah, you are," she said, her voice breaking, and I could see the hurt in her eyes. "But marriage isn't love. Not real love, anyway." Her words hit me like a punch, and I didn't have an answer. She was right. Brandon was a good man, a kind man, but I never felt for him what I felt for Fiona. I never felt that spark, that fire that made me feel alive. But I had made promises, vows I wasn't supposed to break, and I didn't know how to reconcile the two. Fiona took a deep breath, her hand cupping my cheek, forcing me to look at her. "I'm not asking you to leave him," she said, her voice steady. "I'm just asking you to be honest. With him. With yourself. And with me." I swallowed, the weight of her words pressing down on me like a vice. "I don't know if I can," I admitted. and it was the most honest thing I'd said in months. "You can," she said softly, her thumb brushing against my skin, sending a shiver down my spine. "And when you're ready, I'll be here. I'll be waiting." She kissed me again, a gentle, lingering promise that left me breathless, and then she stepped back, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Go," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Go home. Figure out what you really want. But don't take too long. I won't wait forever." I nodded, feeling the sting of tears in my own eyes, and turned back to my car. My hands were shaking as I opened the door, but I didn't look back. I couldn't. I drove home in silence, Fiona's words echoing in my mind, and knew that everything had changed. I wasn't ready to face what that meant yet, but deep down, I knew I couldn't keep pretending. Not to Brandon. Not to myself. And especially not to her. The truth, I realized, was that my heart had never stopped racing. Not when I was with Fiona. Not ever.